Hello, everybody. Welcome to our introduction to figurative language. So these are some terms that we're going to be using a lot during this year, especially in our different novel studies that we use. And we're going to be talking about different devices that the author is using to get their point across, and some of those are called figurative language. So we're going to talk about a couple different points of figurative language. I'll give you a definition and I'll give you an example. Please have your notebook ready to follow along with me and copy this down as I go, okay? I want everyone to have exactly what I have in their notebook, so you have a quick reference to it whenever you need it, all right? So everything I have on my page, you should have on yours. If I'm going too fast and you need to pause the video, go ahead and do that, but you need to have everything I have, all right? Okay, so let's go ahead and start with one that you're probably familiar with, maybe not the word itself, but the term, or what it means at least. We're going to start with personification. Okay, and I know when several of you were in my class, we actually talked about this also in terms of another term called anthropomorphism. I know those are big words. We're going to be using personification more often than anthropomorphism, but just know they mean almost the same thing, okay? They're basically the same term. There's slight differences, but we're not going to worry about those this year. You can worry about those when you get to college or something like that. They're much more advanced than 5th grade. All right, so for personification and anthropomorphism, this term means that we are giving human characteristics to non-human things. Okay, you've probably seen this many times before, just maybe not quite realized what you were looking at. But I'll give you an example. One of the things that I've heard many times in an example of personification is a beautiful picture where people say something like, the flowers danced in the gentle breeze. Okay, the flowers danced in the gentle breeze. Now, obviously, flowers are not, well, they're alive, but they're not human. So flowers cannot actually dance in the term of the way a human would dance. They are not capable of doing that. However, this sentence, the flowers danced in the gentle breeze, is giving a human characteristic of dancing to the flowers. That is an example of personification. Okay, the flowers cannot do that by themselves, but we're making it seem like they can in this sentence. Okay, it just gives you a different picture of what the author's trying to show you. It looks like the flowers are dancing, even though it's not possible for them to actually dance. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next term. There we go. All right, next one we're going to do is foreshadowing. Now, technically, foreshadowing is not actually figurative language. It's called a literary device. It's something that an author will use throughout their story or their writing, but is not technically figurative language. But we're just going to group them all together for now. We're not going to worry about the semantics of this one technically is this one's technically that. We're just going to group them together because we're going to be talking about all of these different terms in many of the stories that we read. All right, so foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a warning or indication of a future event. Okay, storytellers use this all the time. This is a very common literary device, and people, you might have even noticed this in movies that you like or things like that. When you go back and watch a movie for the second or third time, you might notice that towards the beginning of the story, they might make reference to something that later happens in the story. So they're not telling you it's going to happen, but they're referencing it. They're kind of giving you a warning that, oh, this could be happening later in the story. And when you see it a second time or a third time, you catch those things a lot easier. So it's a way for an author to kind of give you a hint of what is coming up. Okay, so here's just a simple sentence illustration or example would be, the evening was still. Suddenly, a cool breeze started blowing and made a windy night. So this is foreshadowing in just one sentence. Normally it's foreshadowing would be over the course of an entire story. But in this sentence, it's not telling you exactly what is happening right now, but it is telling you that something's changing here. This is, the evening was still, suddenly a cool breeze started blowing and made a windy night. So that would be a indication of a storm or some kind of thunderstorm happening. They don't say a thunderstorm started happening, but these indications, a cool breeze started blowing, we know that, oh, that might give us a warning that something is going to change in the weather. Something's happening here. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and go on to our next one. Our next term is hyperbole. And I know it looks like hyperbole. It's not. It's hyperbole. Make sure you say that E sound at the end. Hyperbole. Okay, so hyperbole. This is one that you probably use all the time without even realizing it. Hyperbole is exaggerating an idea for the sake of emphasis. Okay, now that might sound a little confusing, but trust me, you do this all the time. When you say anything that is bigger than it actually is or more exaggerated than it actually is, that is hyperbole. So for example, one that I hear all the time right before lunchtime is, I'm starving. Right? That is hyperbole. When you have not eaten since breakfast time and it's now lunchtime, that's only a couple of hours, you are not actually starving. Starving is when you are actually deprived of food for a long, long, long amount of time and your body is starting to shut down because of it. Okay, going a couple hours between breakfast and lunch does not make you starving. So this is an exaggerated idea for the sake of emphasis. So you're trying to emphasize how hungry you are by saying, I'm starving, even though you aren't actually starving, okay? That's a very common one. Here's another one that I hear a lot that my husband says to me whenever we go on a trip. Oh, my marker's starting to die. He will pick up my suitcase and he will say, your suitcase weighs a ton. Okay, that's also exaggerating. Okay, my suitcase does not actually weigh a ton. A ton is 2,000 pounds. That's more than a car usually. So if my suitcase actually weighed 2,000 pounds, no one would be able to lift it. No human person can lift 2,000 pounds, okay? So this is an exaggeration to just say that my suitcase is very heavy, okay? It doesn't actually weigh a ton, it's exaggerating. He's using hyperbole to point out the fact that I probably packed too much. My suitcase is a little bit too full. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Our next term is simile. All right, so a simile is a comparison using like or as. All right, so you're comparing two things. When you're using a simile, you're comparing two things. However, you must see the word like or as for it to be a simile, and we'll talk about why in just a second. So an example of that would be, she is cunning as a fox. Okay, you see the word as here. Oh, my marker's dying. She is cunning as a fox, okay? So the word as there, we're comparing this person, this woman, with a fox, okay? We're comparing them. She is cunning as a fox, but the word as is there in the middle, so that makes it a simile, okay? Now that is different from our next term, which is a metaphor. Okay, now a metaphor is very similar to a simile. A metaphor is also a comparison. It's a comparison of two unrelated things. But this one does not use the words like or as. All right, so if you see a comparison and it has like or as in it, you automatically know it's a simile. If it does not have like or as, it's a metaphor. They're both comparing two things. You just have to look for these keywords, like or as, to know which one it is. All right, so an example of a metaphor is something you might say, let's see. The homework was a breeze. Okay, so you're comparing your homework and a breeze or some wind. Now, those two things don't normally go together, but you're comparing them and you're trying to emphasize the fact that the homework was easy, okay? A breeze meaning that it just blew right through, it was very easy to do, okay? But I don't have the word as or like in here, which means this is a metaphor. It's comparing two things, but there is no like or as. Okay. All right, I'm going to turn my page. So if you need to continue copying any of this down, go ahead and pause the video and copy down what you need to. And I'm going to turn to the next page for our last two terms. All right. Next one, we have alliteration. This is one of my favorites. I love stories that have alliteration in them. Not sure why, I just think it's kind of soothing to listen to. So alliteration is when there are several words close together having the same beginning consonant sound. Okay, that sounds kind of confusing, but trust me, you've heard this many times before. When there are several words grouped close together in a sentence or in a phrase, or even it could just be two words together, but if they start with the same sound, that's alliteration, okay? You've seen it many times. There's lots of brands that have alliteration. For example, Coca-Cola, both start with a k sound, Coke-a-Cola, right? So that's a very common one. They're all over. Dunkin' Donuts, DD, okay? Both makes that D sound. Those are alliteration. Another example of alliteration that you probably have heard many times is pretty much any tongue twister you've ever heard. Almost every tongue twister, the reason it's a tongue twister is because it's a lot of the same sounds repeated over and over again. So for example, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Very common tongue twister there. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. They all start with a p sound. There's only two words in this entire sentence that don't start with that sound. And since these are all in one sentence and they're grouped together and many of them have that beginning p sound, then this is alliteration. All right, last term for our figurative language introduction. This is one that I can never, ever, ever spell correctly, so I always have to look. This is called onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia. Fun word to say once you get it. Onomatopoeia. Make sure you pay careful attention to all these vowels at the end. It's O-E-I-A. O-E-I-A. Okay, that's onomatopoeia. Now, onomatopoeia is a word which imitates the natural sound of a thing. Okay, if you are into reading graphic novels of any type, they have tons of onomatopoeia. Anytime there's a fight scene or some big explosion happens, they usually have those big words in the explosions, and they are nonsense words. They're like ba-blam or something like that. That is a word that's trying to imitate a sound. So if there's a big explosion happening, they might say boom, because that boom word is trying to imitate the actual sound of an explosion happening. Okay, so you might see something like that. Another example would be a buzzing bee. Okay, a bee makes a bzz sound, so the word buzzing sounds similar to what the sound a bee would actually make. Okay, another one you're probably familiar with would be rustling leaves. Okay, the word rustling kind of sounds similar to what leaves sound like when they're rubbing against each other in the breeze. As the wind comes, they kind of rustle against each other. So that word is trying to imitate the natural sound of leaves rubbing together. All right. Okay, so that's all of our introduction to figurative language. Please make sure you have all of these written down. The word, the definition, and the examples for every single one of these. We're going to use these a lot, and I need you to have a quick reference in your notebook to these different things, okay? So please make sure you have these copied down exactly like mine, and we will go over them together during our small group time, our whole group time, and then as we continue to go through our novel studies, we'll be using these also. All right, thank you guys.